Hey, Sam, welcome to the WP Minute.
Thank you very much for having me.
I have to have a better intro than hey, hey, hey. I've never used that one before.
Yeah, that works for me.
You know why I'm saying hey, hey, hey? Because I was just literally reading the news that this lovely StreamYard platform, watch, I'm probably going to get kicked live on the air, was just acquired or is about to get acquired by the company that owns Evernote. And I was like,
Right.
oh, God. No, I love StreamYard. Please don't make it go the route of Evernote for all app softwares of the world. Today we are joined by Sam Harris. Sam, the other day on a live stream, I called you Sam Smith. There's a UK pop star. My views would go up quite greatly, no offense, but I don't think you're singing any Body Shop songs here on the live stream
No,
with us.
that's a very interesting comparison.
Sam joins us as our in-house Webflow expert, first ever on the WP Minute. So thanks, Sam, for doing that. I'm going to pull up your website here. Everyone just joining the live stream as we get situated, go ahead, say hi. Tell us where you're from, where you're watching, what questions you have about WordPress versus Webflow, because we'll be chatting about that in a moment. I've got some fun stuff in store for us. It's not going to be as gritty as I think some people hope it will be, Sam. I think they want us, to see us in the ring, as it's known, but that's not going to happen. It's going to be a friendly discussion. Sam Harrison, you can find him, of course, on YouTube at his channel. Search for Sam Harrison. I'll drop that in the description once this video goes live. And of course, his website, lighthousedigital.co.uk, where you can buy his Webflow course, which I think you said is actually getting revamped soon, correct?
Yeah, it is. So I wouldn't buy it at the minute if I were you. I'm a terrible salesman, but yeah, I wouldn't yet. I'd hang tight about a month or two. But yes, it is being redone because, Webflow has changed quite a bit over the past sort of year or so. So they have a new user interface. So it's slightly outdated, but it's about to be updated.
Cool. For those that are joining from the Sam side, my name's Matt. I've been covering WordPress for about 11 years. Started an agency back in 2007, ran an agency, WordPress agency, for about a decade. Started having kids, building a family, not just websites. And I was like, this agency thing, I can't do it. I can't do this and have kids and build a family. So got out of that job, starting back into the professional career, did some work at a WordPress hosting company, worked in the podcast and audio space for a couple of years, and now I'm at Gravity Forms, which is the most prominent contact form plugin for WordPress. That's my day job, been there for about a year. So when we start talking WordPress versus Webflow, I have my biases. Sam will have his, but it'll be a fun conversation once we get into that. Sam, what do you do for a day job? It can't just be YouTube. It's got to be something else. What do you do?
Yeah, so I run an agency called Lighthouse Digital, which specifically targets Webflow. We still do a little bit of WordPress now and again. So I actually have been using WordPress arguably for longer than Webflow, probably since 2015, sort of semi-professionally. But I sort of moved away from WordPress as a primary tool of choice in about 2018. So yeah, that's kind of my day-to-day, really. That's kind of what I spend most of my time doing. I do sort of dabble a bit in YouTube as well. I've not been as prolific as I should be. I've not been uploading as much as I would like to, just because time issues and things get in the way, and it takes a lot of time to make YouTube videos. So it's a struggle sometimes to fit everything in.
Yeah, a lot of us in the space think that, when I was coming up in the WordPress world, it was very popular. I guess it still is, where it's like you start an agency, or a consultancy or a boutique agency, whatever you want to call it. And suddenly you're like, I don't want to do this client stuff anymore. I want to just sell like themes and plugins, which is, obviously the WordPress side of things. So there's like this big push to kind of learn and start to grow and build product. There's a few folks, one that I know is watching, Mark Zemansky, who joins me a lot on the live stream. He's an agency owner, and he's trying to, not trying, he is in the content space as well. So it's interesting to see now a lot of folks trying to get into like the YouTube content creation side, and then maybe taking the path towards courses, community, membership, whatever it is that, we can do to help augment. There's nothing wrong with it, but a particular challenge, like what are your thoughts on running the course? Now you have to rebuild it all. There's a new Webflow. There's that challenge. What are your particular challenges of balancing agency and the digital product content side of the house?
Yeah, it certainly is a challenge. So I think, in all honesty, the creator side of it has suffered, particularly last year for me, just because, well, it's a nice problem to have, but the client side went very, very well the past couple of years, really. So finding time to try and balance all those things out have been very, very difficult. I've been trying to upload once a week, but I've failed already this year. but yeah, it is very tricky. I suppose it's just trying to be as productive as you can with the time that you have, and kind of trying to plan better, and maybe take on more help as you need to. It's something I haven't been very good at the past couple of years, which is delegating to some degree. I do have some guys that I work with on projects, but a big chunk of the client work is still very much me doing it. I always develop things in Webflow. I do have some designer colleagues that sort of help me out with that. But yeah, it's a lot to take on, and kind of doing both things is quite tricky.
We were talking about this offline, and sorry about that. I'm fixing my audio now. Let me make sure if that sounds better, just give a thumbs up in the chat. Here's the struggle of creator life. Take my laptop downstairs, do some work downstairs, unplug everything, and then when I plug it back in, volume goes south. Right? Like the Vocaster hub doesn't work, and my audio gets all messed up. So if that's better, go ahead and let me know in the comments. We were talking before we hit record, or before we went live, and we'll talk about this when we start talking Webflow versus WordPress. Curious, getting business through Webflow, do they have a good referral system, a good partnership system? Because that's like one of the areas that I don't think the WordPress side does too well. But how do you get your clients? How do you find your clients looking for Webflow?
Yeah. So yeah, Webflow have like a part on their website which they designate for what they call Webflow experts. So you basically have to go through some tests, and they kind of basically view your work to kind of make sure that you're legit, and they kind of feature you on their site. In all honesty, I don't get tons of work through that. I've had some good clients come through it actually, but it's pretty few and far between. But that's kind of okay. It's something they do for free. You don't have to pay for it or anything like that. It's just something they just do to feature you. Webflow are pretty good at showcasing, Webflow people on their channel. Like I did a live stream yesterday for Webflow as well, which was quite good. First time I've ever done that. But yeah, so they're pretty good at that kind of thing. But most of the clients that I get, I pretty much probably either coming via YouTube maybe, or via just organic search. If you type in like Webflow Agency UK, the site tends to be in the top 3. So we're kind of, since we're niching down on the tool rather than a particular niche in terms of industry, you're kind of, it works quite nicely as a marketing tool in of itself as well.
So organic, whoa, that's really blown out now. Organic search still working for you then, SEO?
Yeah, it's pretty good, just particularly as I'm targeting particularly in the UK as well. So it's niching down pretty hard with a fairly niche tool. So there's not tons of traffic that comes from that, but the ones that do come in tend to convert pretty well because there aren't that many people doing it. So if you're trying to stand out as a WordPress developer, you're against literally half the world pretty much. Whereas with Webflow, it's not quite the same. So the competition isn't quite as fierce, and you can actually make, you can be a slightly bigger fish in a smaller pond, so to speak.
Sure. What is the general outlook for Webflow? Generally on this channel, we're talking about like the future of WordPress, and people are looking at all aspects of WordPress. We constantly have to look at where Automatic is going, what they're doing, what the third-party plugin ecosystem is doing, themes, hosting. There's a lot of places we all have to look and hypothesize around, whereas probably safer to say Webflow, you just, hey guys, hey Webflow, what are you doing with the product? What's your general outlook on where Webflow is headed?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, it's a hard one to answer because obviously they don't divulge all of that kind of thing. But but yeah, there've been some things that have changed over the past few years, which kind of point to where it's going in terms of what kind of sites you should use for Webflow. I guess we'll get into that when we get into the versus WordPress thing. But there are certain kinds of websites that you just you wouldn't use Webflow for. Webflow is particularly good at business websites, marketing websites, usually fairly creative ones for that, because it kind of attracts designers a lot of the time as well. But in terms of their trajectory, I know that, well, I don't know for sure, but I suspect very heavily that they're kind of improving the CMS aspect of it more this year, which is something that a lot of people in the Webflow community are very much want. There's a few things, like there's a few limitations that kind of get in the way of making certain kinds of websites that once those kind of stumbling blocks are removed, it kind of opens up doors to different kinds of websites that scale more too. But it's but yeah, no, it's a great tool, but again, you have to sort of use it for the right kinds of websites, I would say.
Yeah. How try to set the stage for like our different perspectives on our favorite platforms. Obviously, WordPress, your Webflow. I have been out of the agency game for, I don't know, 6 years at this point, I think, roughly 6 or 7 years. Like I haven't been servicing clients and deploying sites and designing, developing. The agency I runs, my father runs it. We were partners together. So the agency still runs. He's typically servicing small clients. So I'm still seeing things, still have an email address, and I'm still seeing the questions coming back and forth from customers. So I do have like a pulse on it, obviously. I cover WordPress news and I work for Gravity Forms, so I see it from the end user perspective. But what I'm getting at is I've shifted myself to be less demanding of like design development tools for WordPress, and have sat comfortably in the I'm just a power user of WordPress. Give me the buttons and the things I can click inside of WordPress, because I don't have time for cracking open an editor, deploying to GitHub, pushing that to staging, to production. Used to do that, used to live that life, don't live that life anymore. And in fact, don't even use like a page builder, like a Beaver Builder, Elementor, or everyone's favorite tool these days, Bricks, to build sites. I say, just give me the core WordPress. I don't have time, to do these other, to learn these other tools and then to support these other tools. So that's where I cap off these days with using WordPress. How far do you push Webflow for you? Are you using all the features? Are you staying away from some? What's your, how deep do you dive into Webflow?
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends on the kind of sites to a degree that you're making. So part of the reason that I moved away from WordPress as a primary thing is I started to look at my portfolio of work, and I started to realize that, okay, so WordPress can let you do all of these different things, which is great. And it's what's brilliant about it, of course. There is no limitations with WordPress at all. But I started to look at my portfolio and I sort of realized, like, how much of these features am I actually using? And also I just love the Webflow UI. It kind of makes sense to my brain to build websites in that way. But another benefit of Webflow is that, everything is taken care of for you as well. So hosting, all that kind of thing, all of that's all kind of managed for you. Security, a big one, which is quite useful to not have to worry about that. And in terms of the features used in Webflow, the CMS is used pretty heavily. So obviously in WordPress, the best comparison, I suppose, is that Webflow has advanced custom fields kind of essentially built in, not quite as feature rich as advanced custom fields probably. But it has their own kind of version of it that gets used a lot for clients. So that kind of side of it. Try and not use animations too much. Webflow users are very guilty of that, of going a bit too crazy with animations. Webflow is kind of known for being very, good when it comes to sort of inbuilt animations and what have you. And Webflow users have taken maybe too much advantage of that over time. So I try and not go too crazy with that. I have made websites that have been quite over the top in that kind of area, but you can still be sensible with the kind of websites that you make with it. You don't have to go into that kind of side of things. But yeah, so in terms of the feature set of Webflow, I use most of them. I haven't done too much of localization yet, which is a relatively new feature that they've released. But yeah, most of the features I do get a fair bit of use out of.
Zach says we don't have to use all the animations in Webflow. There's a few WordPress products, like builder products. I'll just call them builder products. They say they're page builders, but they're really just blocks for WordPress. That advertise like the whole animations thing. Is that a thing? Like, are clients requesting animations? I don't get it. I would just never use animations because I just don't want anything extra, like loading on a site. But is that an attractive feature for designers these days? I'm old too. I mean, I'm not young anymore.
Well, I think the simple answer is probably yes, whether it should be or not. I try and not go too crazy with that because for the same reasons that you probably think, is that actually it does slow things down, and it's not always a great user experience if you go too crazy. But having said that, I have had requests from clients that basically want like a showpiece for a landing page or something like that. And Webflow is the perfect kind of option for that kind of thing. So it does it very, very well. It's pretty simple to use. But no, I would say for like 90% of all client work, you're not going too crazy with animations, just because it's not necessarily a predictor of success or good conversions.
All right, we're going to start getting into our Webflow versus WordPress discussion now, but I brought a clip, Sam. You might know this guy talking about Webflow versus WordPress.
One of the main benefits of using something like WordPress is that it is open source, so you can do pretty much anything you want with it. There is a slight more focus on maintenance when it comes to WordPress, which again is another reason why I switched over to Webflow. With WordPress, you have to worry about plugin updates, you have to worry about theme updates, you have to worry about what PHP version you have, WordPress core updates. There's always a slight level of anxiety when it comes to working with WordPress because you have to have a little bit of technical knowledge on how it actually works and operates. Whereas with Webflow, hosting is managed for you, updates are all managed for you. There is no maintenance whatsoever when it comes to Webflow. You literally connect your domain and that's it. You're good to go.
You might know that guy. We just entered the Matrix. You look exactly the same as when you recorded that episode. It's a fantastic video, by the way. It's one of your most popular videos, which is running running a design business or running a web agency or something like that. Fantastic. Check that out on Sam's channel. And I really appreciate the fact that you brought up WordPress in the mix because, like you said in that video, you're going to come across it. Even if you don't want to use it or dislike it, I think it's very smart for you to recommend to other Webflow consultants that, hey, if you're going to run into a client, they might be coming from WordPress, and it's not going to be as easy to just peel that WordPress site out and bring it over to Webflow without hitting a major reset button. And I don't think if you start taking on bigger types of clients, it's just not, you're not just going to be like, okay, we'll just delete that and throw in Webflow. No. There's going to be hundreds, maybe thousands of pages you have to migrate. You're going to be in the weeds a little bit with WordPress. So very smart. And I applaud you, for recommending to your Webflow, I almost said customers, but your Webflow followers to learn WordPress a little bit. It makes sense. And I think it should go both ways. I think everyone should have some idea on how these technologies work, because I know of a few WordPress agencies who build very large WordPress projects who are now getting into Webflow saying, you know what, we're actually using this for the more scaled down projects. And then we use our real custom high-end stuff with WordPress. So I'm starting to see this crossover.
Yeah, for sure. But and I unlike some Webflow users, I have nothing against WordPress at all. Like I very much, I don't want to live in a world where it doesn't exist. And with my channel, my idea was to try and merge the two worlds a little bit, to try and introduce, each different user to each other's tool, because there's a lot of similarities, particularly if you're using Bricks Builder, for example, in WordPress. It's basically the same experience in Webflow, or very, very similar. Builders in WordPress like Oxygen and probably Bricks as well were probably slightly inspired by Webflow to some degree. Oxygen definitely was. So, the tool set and the workflow of those tools in particular work in a very similar way. And again, if you're using each tool for the right kind of thing, that I try and just use the right tool for the job. I'm not particularly what's the word, tribal about what I use. I don't really care as long as it does what I want it to do. It so happens that, you know, I find Webflow the easiest tool to use and the quickest one to use, just because, again, so much is taken care of for you. And for me, it's worth some of the limitations that you have with the platform. Even though they're there, you know, most of the time it doesn't really affect the clients that I'm working with.
Francois in the audience, problem is clients see example sites and they want the same, or then want the same. Francois, what's up? Francois, very skilled web designer, web UI designer guy that I work with in the past. Good to see you in the audience. Peter, there's also a number of accessibility issues with animation. Curious about Webflow's commitment to accessibility. We'll talk about that. Funny that, let me click on this. Funny that everybody in WP and Webflow are using GSAP for animations. I don't even know what that is. Sam, do you know what GSAP is? I don't know. Am I even saying that right? Is it like GIF? I have to say GSAP. Is that what I'm supposed to say? Right. All right, GSAP. So pairing it with something like Bricks Builder is on. What the heck is GSAP, Sam?
It's just an animation library. So it's there's actually a tool in WordPress. It's called Motion Page, which gives you kind of like it's actually a really good plugin, and that gives you arguably, you know, a better experience than even something Webflow can offer in terms of animations. Actually, they've got like a really cool sort of timeline effect with that, and they use GSAP for that. Webflow doesn't do that natively. It's not using GSAP, but you can use GSAP with Webflow, but it's not a native feature. So yeah, it's all good.
All right, Sam, here's what we're going to try to do. I've got this leaderboard. Like most things in life, I haven't planned this out. I don't know how well it's going to work, but we're going to try. We're going to debate some of the topics that I have below. Looking for crowd feedback as well. I'm trying to position these tabs so I can see both the chat and this. And we'll try to break down some of the elements here. Sam has no idea I prepared this. He doesn't even know the topics. So let's give him some slack here as well. Let's start with, I think, one of the best, one of the most discussed topics, and that is of pricing. And what we'll do is we'll pick a side, which one wins. And then I thought about it. What happens if neither win? We'll just toss it in the middle. I don't know. That's as best as I have. Let's talk pricing. Pricing for WordPress. I'll start with my side. I think a lot of people might say, oh, it's free. It's open source. You know, you can download it. You can do whatever you want with it. Does not mean that there's not a cost with WordPress. Certainly learning WordPress, understanding how the stuff all operates, spending a lot of time spinning your wheels. Where do I find this information? That can be pretty costly. If you're a small business owner, you default to maybe a web host, right? And you look at WordPress cost as, well, how much do I have to spend for my web host? That could range from $5 a month to $5,000 a month, depending on, you know, what your web hosting needs are here. Advocating for WordPress and taking my side of the WordPress versus Webflow thing, when I look at the pricing of Webflow, there are things that really hurt my head about it. And that's getting charged for CMS items, right? Like that is mind-boggling to me. And user access, right? Whatever, I don't know what they call it, 5 seats or something like that you have access. Whereas WordPress, I mean, I could grow my database as large as I want. Again, bottleneck being the host. And I could have 1 million users logged in, or 1 million user accounts, theoretically, that people could log in and access. And those are the two, when I look at Webflow, immediately I go, oh, like that feels weird to me on the pricing side of things. Your thoughts on pricing Webflow versus WordPress?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone knows that, you know, you can get very cheap WordPress hosting. Whether you should or not is another question, but you can. And in terms of what's ultimately cheaper to use, obviously WordPress is cheaper. But I think my argument would be, for any sort of serious business, I don't think $29 a month for Webflow is really that big a deal. I mean, again, I don't think Webflow has parity pricing for certain parts of the world. So I guess that's one area maybe where they could look at that. And I'm just seeing some of these comments.
Yeah.
Webflow's pricing is very confusing, and that's because you've got the hosting plan, which is for the actual website itself, and then you've got the kind of the agency or freelancer plan, which is basically you the developer, is being charged separately to that. Again, all of which I'm happy to pay for. It's worth it. But yeah, it's kind of, in terms of the being charged for CMS items, I don't really think of it that way, because it is, you're getting more than just one thing. You're not paying for add-ons as such. There are different hosting plans available for Webflow, and some of them have an amount of CMS items, so to speak. Again, it depends on what kind of website you're making. If you're making huge, large-scale web applications, then yeah, you're going to run into issues. But I don't think that's really what Webflow is designed for. It's for marketing websites. And if you're if you're blogging, for example, so a blog, for example, would be a CMS item or a CMS page. You'd have to blog every day of the year for 30 years to hit that 10K limit. So it's not in real terms an issue, I don't think, most of the time. I would have thought, the internet will look very different in 30 years. So yeah, I would have thought if everyone's still going the same way they are, I would have thought those limits will have increased by then.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do this in the most readable way possible without switching my screens all the time. So I'm just looking at the $23 a year, about $250 $23 a month, $250 a year roughly. 150 pages, 2,000 CMS items, 1,000 form submissions monthly, 3 content editors, and site search. It's just, I totally see your side of it. It's an all-encompassing, it's a turnkey solution. You're there, you're hosting all of that stuff there. From the WordPress side of it, I'm like, wow, I just feel inherently limited by that because of what I can do, with WordPress. And I think it really comes into play from a business standpoint, is when you look at 3 content editors. Because I agree with you, it's like, yeah, it's going to take you a while to hit those items. And of course, 1,000 form submissions a month. If you're getting 1,000 form submissions a month, you're doing something pretty great with your business. So, $23 a month shouldn't be that much. But then I really start to think of it as like, oh, okay, 3 content editors. Well, that could be limiting, right? You have yourself, you have the owner of the business, maybe a couple other people who contribute, and suddenly now you're landlocked, and you have to push up the price point for a small business. So that's where I really see the issue coming into play. Is there a clear winner for pricing? What do you want to give it to, Sam? WordPress or Webflow?
Webflow,
or is it in the middle?
I think it depends how we're framing it. If we're saying what is the cheapest tool to use, it's WordPress.
Yeah.
But I think in real terms, depending on what kind of clients you're working with, I don't think it's actually an issue either way. I've never had a client using Webflow moan about even the top pricing plan. So it's kind of, I think it very much depends who you, if it's very small businesses, then yeah, they probably shouldn't even be using Webflow, arguably. But yeah, I think it's probably still right to give WordPress this one. All
right. WordPress wins. If I had my other soundboard, is the other reason why I switched out my Rodecaster, I'd be hitting the bell right now. Ding, 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 ding. To WordPress. All right, let's talk themes. This is where you'll probably have a lot more knowledge for me. And I actually have 2 of these items because when I put this together, I was thinking, well, I understand the concept of themes for WordPress. I assume Webflow has like predetermined themes. So maybe theme ecosystem, and then design, like, if you're a front-end designer, how well can you design with Webflow versus WordPress? So let's start with themes. Obviously, the theme ecosystem for WordPress is massive, tons of options. Is this fair to even bring up themes? Does Webflow have themes? Great collection, you tell me.
It depends what you mean by themes, really. So templates, yeah, Webflow has a template store. But yeah, Webflow doesn't have like a theming system like WordPress does as such.
Got it.
So it would be templates, I suppose, really.
All right. Themes versus templates. Large selection in Webflow. Have you ever looked at the selection of WordPress themes to bring in? Pre-designed websites, landing pages, call to action sections, newsletter signups, all that stuff pre-designed. Webflow selection is good, bad, otherwise?
Very good. I mean, I don't really use theme or templates at all, really. So it's hard for me to really say. So I suppose that's really for people that would use that, or maybe just want to get something up very quickly and not sort of designing it themselves per se in Webflow. The kind of people that would use templates in Webflow probably aren't overly technical people, I would have thought. So they have quite a lot, but again, they won't have the same level as something like WordPress have, just because of how long WordPress has been going and all the rest of it. But in terms of things like component libraries, Webflow is pretty good for that kind of thing. But yeah, it's they don't have themes, but they have templates. But yeah, not as many as WordPress, I wouldn't have thought.
Can one just go and purchase pre-design? I'm looking at webflows.com/templates. I see some 49, 59, 79. Decent looking field there. When someone buys that and brings it to you, do you go, oh God, you bought this template? I should just redesign it myself. Like, do you get that feeling? Because sometimes that's what happens in the WordPress where like, oh God, like this is going to be a $5,000 project. You're not going to solve it with a $50 theme.
Yeah, I don't really work with templates at all, really. So if a client came to me and said that they would probably be looking for, a lower price, which we just wouldn't do. So it's not something I would ever really work with. I think that's maybe just for sort of like an in-house marketing team wants to very quickly get something up and running. Maybe they don't have much knowledge of Webflow. Maybe they would do that. But yeah, I don't personally really work with that because Webflow really is designed for you to be, to create your own things, really. So yeah.
Cool. I'm going to give it to WordPress just for sheer selection, right? Just for sheer selection and support. Third-party companies, way back in the day, you have free ones you can download from WordPress.org. You can probably get the same for Webflow. I would just say that WordPress has a much more thriving ecosystem of third-party themes that one has access to with feature functions that kind of expand the experience of WordPress. If you disagree, let us know in the comments. Let's go to design. This is where you will trump me in knowledge for sure. This is a heavily debated topic in WordPress. I will say that it is a fragmented experience for sure. We have WordPress core. We have people who can crack open a code editor and start designing on WordPress with CSS, JavaScript, HTML, themes like we just talked about, Bricks, Elementor, Beaver Builder, all these things. A very fragmented, highly debated topic. And what I'll do for you, Sam, is I'll start sliding this over to the Webflow side of it to give it the advantage because I know like it's an all-encompassing solution. Your thoughts on design for Webflow versus WordPress?
Yeah, I mean, I would give this to Webflow probably, just because whenever you come to Webflow, everyone is using the same tool. That's one of the benefits of inheriting a project. Even if let's say I kind of went against what I said, and I took on a template from a client, for example, even though I maybe wouldn't like the way it was organized, I am using the same tool. Whereas when it comes to WordPress, it may be Bricks, it might be Elementor, it might be core WordPress. So your experience will be very different every single time you come to it. Whereas with Webflow, it basically is visual coding. It is if you name your classes in such a way, you can even export your site away from it. And the control that you have with Webflow, you can control literally every single element, down to everything. There are builders, of course, in WordPress that kind of do a similar thing now. But I think because we have the feature set that we do in Webflow, it probably does, I think, just about take it, just because it's all the consistency of it as well. Like you say, it's always the same tool that we use.
I don't see any of my fellow WordPress purists in the crowd, screaming at me about how Notepad++ is the best design tool ever made for writing CSS and adjusting WordPress websites. But I will agree. I will give the nature of the product and, of course, the user experience that Webflow has built. I will give the design experience the advantage to Webflow. Here's one that I think can be debated fairly well, client access. And by client access is sort of what I was hinting at before when I was looking at the Webflow pricing. back again when I ran my agency, before page builders were a thing, really, what we were doing, we were using a plugin called Advanced Custom Fields. We were building out custom fields or templates, or paired with templates in WordPress, and we would build out those sections, and we would say, hey, we'd create a user. CEO. CEO would have editor access only. In other words, they wouldn't have access to plugins and themes and really to break anything on the site. We would build them sort of a panel, a dashboard that they would go to change the homepage text, to change an image here or there on a featured page, stuff that you can do more natively now in blocks and patterns. But we could control that with finite detail. We could have one user that only had access to do one thing. When we're like, for example, like when we're building, we did a lot with like real estate companies back in the day. We would have a rate calculator, for example, where people could just put in the rates of the loans that they would get for houses, and they would tell us like, oh, it's just an intern in our office that I just need them to go in and punch in and put the new rate in. Okay, here's intern user login, and all they have access to is this one little freaking text field that they could go in and change the percentage rate as the percentage rate changed. So we could get really, really granular on the WordPress side without the pricing limitations or maybe even limitations of the platform. Your thoughts, or do you think of client access differently in the Webflow world? How does it work for you?
Yeah, so well, you're right in what you're saying. So you are limited to some degree by what pricing plan you have and how many editors that you have. Again, do you need more than 10 editors? I wouldn't have thought so. That's probably enough. I would have thought. To be fair, that is the maximum. That's on the maximum Webflow plan that you have. But again, I don't think that's a huge deal. So yeah, if you wanted 100 editors, I suppose you would have to go with WordPress for that. But I don't think that's a real scenario where you'd actually ever need to use that. I would also lump into some degree components. Well, I guess we'll come to that later, actually, because I think I can see that on your list of things. But no, I mean, in terms of ultimate control, yeah, I think WordPress probably still takes that one to some degree.
All right. So I'm just looking at the same time, trying to juggle a whole bunch of things here while reading comments and looking at Webflow's site. I guess what I'd love to know, just looking at Webflow's site, is their business plan stops at $39 a month, and then it goes to contact us for enterprise.
Yeah.
For like the content editors. What's the difference between, are all logins for Webflow considered content editors? Could somebody have access to the blog but not be a content editor? Is that a thing?
Yes, you do have control to some degree what certain people can do. Again, so I guess I'll come back to components in a bit, I suppose. But there are ways you can actually structure. Yeah, that I'm just seeing that comment there. That is annoying.
You're my show, Sam. There are a lot of WordPress supporters here.
But yeah, so I mean, you are limited to the amount of editors that you can have, and the amount of kind of options you've got with WordPress. You can control more what certain people do. That's definitely true. But all I would say is I think in real terms, it's never really that much of an issue. I've never had a client come back to me and say, oh, we need our 11th person to edit. It's kind of a non-issue for most things, I would have thought. In terms of restricting them to do certain things, there's a way you can now use components in Webflow to give clients or even a way of updating and designing without using the main designer. So that kind of almost ties in a little bit to that to some degree. So I guess I'll mention that later when we get to components. Okay. But yeah,
it's going to depend on what you're doing for client work. I just so happen to do client work for a lot of other. We had a collection of media sites we used to work for. Again, you have to remember this is back 2007, 2008, 2009. A lot of publishers, traditional publishers, magazines, newspapers coming online, air quotes, to the real world, to the internet, and we were building WordPress sites for them. So you had writers, editors, you had a whole org chart of people who needed access for publishing workflow. Read, edit, approve, and then like work on the site itself, people that were building out advertising. And so there was just so many levels of access we needed to give in the WordPress world. And I would love to know like where that breaks down in the enterprise pricing of Webflow, because knowing the SaaS world, like HubSpot, Salesforce, ClickUp, having dealt with those platforms before to purchase accounts from, I can only imagine what the sales process is like once you get into the enterprise pricing of Webflow, because that's where they make their money. I'm gonna
Yeah,
get to WordPress
sure.
again.
Well, it's a big, a fairly decent portion of their money will come from that. But yeah, I've actually not used Webflow Enterprise, so I probably couldn't say in all honesty.
I have this one here. I have this card as a business, and that's for you and me and the folks in the crowd. Like as a business, for us, for service providers, for web designers, for web developers, I'll probably jump ahead and say that this falls right in the middle. This would probably be the first one that falls in the middle. Depends on which route you want to go, and even run them in tandem. Have WordPress for a solution, have Webflow for another solution. Just like I talk about in the WordPress world a lot, you might get to a point where, using bricks is for your advanced projects. Customer has a lot of design requirements. You want to optimize that workflow or insert any page builder. They want to optimize that workflow. And then there's clients that come to you, they're like, hey, we only have, your entry level budget, $2,500, $5,000, whatever that number is. And you just say, okay, it's core WordPress. It's this theme. It's these options. That's it. And it's this price because I'm going to educate you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to launch the site. It's a whole heck of a lot more than me designing a website than it is about supporting you and getting you up to speed on how to run this thing for your business. So as a business, WordPress versus Webflow, I say right in the middle. How about you, Sam?
Yeah, I'd probably go with that.
Obviously, you're a Webflow professional. So that's an easy one. Community. I mean, the community is vast in WordPress. Has a bit of a head start being 20 years old. Lots of folks out there supporting WordPress, lots of folks building WordPress, lots of people teaching WordPress, WordPress meetups, word camps where folks can go and dance around a campfire about WordPress.
I bet they do as well.
Yeah, they definitely do, Sam. I've been to the after parties. The community is with all of its struggles like of family fights and whatnot. The community is quite robust on the WordPress side. How about the Webflow side?
Yeah, it's very nice, particularly on Twitter. That's kind of where most of the Webflow people sort of hang out, I think. You do have Facebook groups, but Facebook groups tend out to bring the worst in people in all walks of life. But yeah, Webflow sort of on Twitter is a very nice place, and everyone's very nice on there. But no, if we're talking, the amount of people that use WordPress, it's impossible to compete with that, because obviously it's been going for so long, and you can't be open source and free in their eyes. So it's kind of, yeah, it's impossible to compete with the size of WordPress to some degree.
How much of the community, do I have this as, I think I took it out. I wrote it down, but I ran out of a nice even number of cards. So I think I took it out. Yeah. How much of that community conversation comes into a sales process for Webflow? In other words, when I was selling websites and folks were picking WordPress, it would come up often like, hey, why should, because, obviously there were other platforms back when I was running an agency. People would say, why pick you versus a Squarespace? And I would often bring in, hey, look, one of the great things about WordPress, aside from it being open source, is the community, because if my agency ever goes away, you have other people that will pick up. You could find another service provider, right, to help you with this. Does that come up in Webflow? Is that kind of a thing in your world?
Yeah, I think the questions usually come in sort of, well, they're not really worried about finding another Webflow developer, because again, there might not be the amount that there is with WordPress, and then there probably never will be. But there's still an abundance of those people out there. So I don't think that's the worry. Usually the worry is around limitations, like can we do all the things we want to do? And as you as the professional, you have to make sure that you're suggesting the right tool, of course. And in most cases, it ends up being the right tool for most of the kind of sites that you end up making, particularly when it comes to just business and marketing sites. Webflow works very well for that. But no, I don't. I've never had a client worry about that side of it.
Zach says Webflow community is microscopic compared to WordPress, but it's insanely supportive and vibrant. Let me ask you this question. Is it possible for a customer, I'm going to put community in the center because I like you, Sam. and I think, we shouldn't say just because WordPress size, the size of the community doesn't mean that, like Zach says here, it doesn't mean it's not supportive or helpful to people. So that's enough for me to just, throw it in the middle and sort of have that bipartisan approach. Let me ask you this question. You build a site for somebody, they're hosted on Webflow. I know Webflow has like that designer client relationship built into the portal. If you ever disappeared or a service provider ever disappeared, could the customer just call up Webflow and say, I don't know, somebody built a site for me. Do you have anybody that could help me? Like, do they offer that as a back-end service that you know of?
Sort of, yeah. So the Webflow experts sort of panel that I mentioned earlier, they have basically a listing of verified sort of Webflow freelancers or agencies that they have. So yes, in fact, if their freelancer just sort of vanished, they could actually just look on the Webflow site or ask Webflow directly, and they will just point them to that page where they can search by location to try and find someone else to do the job for them.
That's enough for me to put it right in the middle, because I don't even think you'd get that kind of support from a web host. I'm sure they would try, but maybe not as tight knit or have uniformity to that solution. Andy, thanks for the super chat, $10. Thanks for a fun stream, Andy. Thanks for hanging out today. Thanks for the super chat. I have this content card. I have this content card. I have a card called content. And when I was putting this one together, I was thinking to myself, okay, content, writing content, migrating content. I wasn't really sure how to approach this other than just like working with content on either platform. Years ago, I couldn't imagine a world with blocks and the Gutenberg editor and writing content with blocks. Now, I can't imagine a world without it. Like writing rich content, bringing in blocks here and there to enrich that experience, migrating content, extracting content from WordPress, I feel is 90% of the time a fairly smooth process. People get it once you train them. But I don't know what it's like to import content to Webflow, export content from Webflow, or even write content in Webflow. Is that writing experience good? Your thoughts?
Sorry, when you say content, you mean things like blogs and that kind of thing? Or?
Blogs, pages. If we were migrating a site from, one WordPress site to another, we could take all that content that's in custom fields and safely extract that and bring that into a new site. I feel like the whole like storing content, writing content, creating content in WordPress, again, has its issues, but I feel is largely pretty good for a platform. But your thoughts on that for Webflow?
Yeah, there's probably not many reasons you would need to move from one Webflow site to another, really. I mean, you would just redesign the site that you have in that particular Webflow project.
True.
In terms of writing content and that kind of thing, it's very simple. So if you want to just literally just change like text or write blog posts, it all works very similar to WordPress, really. So you just go to the correct CMS collection, as it'd be called, in Webflow, and then you can basically just start editing and adding things in there as you'd expect to.
And that writing experience, writing blogs and such, is it a good experience?
Yeah, Yeah.
Damn,
I don't know what else to say.
This is where we
Yeah,
cross paths. Let me look to the audience. What do folks think? For those who have blogged in Webflow versus blogged in WordPress, what's the better experience? Let's see. Andy asked a valid question. Does Webflow require you to use that editor for all content, like even writing a blog post? Is it a real technical editor when you're writing a blog post? Whereas I think WordPress has like distraction-free mode. You can hide everything and just focus on writing content because it was a blog platform first 20 years ago. Like I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on drafting and writing blogs, but does Webflow give that to you? Like, do they focus on the writing experience?
Well, yeah, in it, just in the sense that you have, you can create a blog sort of CMS collection within. So it works a little bit different because obviously the platforms are different, but you would create a blog CMS collection. These comments.
This is great. This is great.
I should be able to add some of my own cards here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say it's good. Yeah, it's a very similar experience. You've got a rich text field. You can design your blog however you want to, and you can use components as well to kind of turn things on or off depending on what you want to be on the blog. So if you want certain pages to feature like an image carousel or a video here or there, you can kind of tailor it to how you want to do it. And that kind of comes back to components again a little bit. Components is going to win, by the way, but but yeah, I think it's pretty much on par. I mean, there may be a few extra things you can do with WordPress potentially, but I think as a platform for blogging on, I think it works great.
All right, let me do this really quick. I was trying to get all of this in the hour, but that might not be possible. Let's try this. We're kind of doing this stuff on the fly. I hope these things are effective. I only have a free account on Webflow. Where do I go to start writing a blog post?
Sure. So you go to your CMS option there. So if you go to that, then you would create a CMS collection from there.
And this is a single blog post right here.
Yeah. So you can add different fields like you would in ACF, for example. You can add various different fields for users to input their content into.
Is this the same view a customer gets?
Not quite. I mean, it depends. So you've got a few different modes. You've got edit mode. You're currently in designer view, which is what the developer would use.
Yep.
Clients can use this view if they want to, but there is the editor view too, which is slightly different. Edit mode is something where Webflow is probably pushing towards a little bit, which looks kind of like this view with the same kind of color scheme and what have you, but just simplifies it a little bit. So yeah, it pretty much would be pretty much similar to that.
Oh, Sam, I thought we were going to be friends. Just kidding. So here's all my WordPress blog posts. And when I go to add new posts, I have my classical music running in the background, a cup of coffee. I could focus on my writing. This, I feel like I'm going to launch a rocket ship. All right. How about we do this? We'll go like this. I give a little bit over the line to content to Webflow.
I can't see what you're doing.
Oh, I'm not sharing the, I forgot. I'm not sharing the, I got to switch back. We go back to this. I give it to just a little bit over the line. Favor WordPress for content. I think that writing experience in WordPress is going to be far better. Again, bit of a lead in time and evolution, and the core focus of WordPress being a blog to begin with probably is where that edges out. Here's another one. And if you have thoughts on, Zach says too generous. Thanks, Zach. Let's talk about support. This is another one I think might land on the line, depending on how you decipher support. I see support again coming from tons of agencies in the WordPress world. Again, agencies and consultants in the Webflow world. Size, number doesn't really matter for that. But I also think of support as community, as content, as YouTube channels, coming from the web hosts, the various web hosts supporting particular aspects of WordPress better than others or more focused. An example would be web hosts for WordPress that specifically focus on publishers, high volume websites, editing workflow, staging and development workflow. WP Engine, for example, has a tool for you to develop locally on your laptop and then push it to their web hosting. Kinsta has a local tool. A lot of other folks support sort of like these staging workflows. Pantheon was famous for that when they first came onto the scene. And they all have their particular pockets of support channels for that. Webflow has the advantage. Speaking a little bit for Webflow, Webflow has the advantage because it's just Webflow. It's just one location that you go to. The support is built on in-house, but I'm curious to know that, again, client-agency relationship, does a client ever contact Webflow and say, hey, this thing isn't working the way it should be? And then Webflow looks at you and says, hey, Sam, fix this. You did it wrong. Or does Webflow just answer everyone's questions in the client-agency relationship?
Well, not very much goes wrong. So you end up not.
Folks. Sam's looking at the scorecard. He's going, God damn, it's lopsided to WordPress. I gotta win.
I want to have my own cards. Yeah. I mean, I think I've never reached out to Webflow support. In all honesty, I've never had to do that. Yeah. That's partly because, I mean, there isn't, it either works or it doesn't work. I mean, there have been times where the design has been a little bit buggy, perhaps, where I've had to actually ask like what's going on, or if something's gone down, for example. It's very, very few and far between. But in terms of reaching out to support for clients, if you're working regularly with a client, they'll probably come to you rather than going to Webflow directly. So yeah, I mean, obviously Webflow have support, and their team knows all about that product, of course. But yeah, to be honest with you, I actually can't speak that much about Webflow support because I've never really needed to use it.
All right, I'm willing to give edge of support to Webflow on this one, since we debated the content one pretty heavily. There was, so I recently interviewed Rafal Tamal. He just launched a theme called rockbase.co, or just rockbase, but you can find it at rockbase.co. He is kind of famous in the WordPress world. He was the lead designer in StudioPress for many years ago, designing and developing a lot of themes for the Genesis framework. And he did a lot of Webflow work in his agency, or has done a lot of Webflow work in his agency. And he said it's not as hands-off that one might think in the client agency relationship. He said that it was actually a little bit harder to support Webflow in the fact that most of those customers just wanted more support from the agency relationship. Like, it almost sounded, and the interview is coming out on Monday, folks can listen to it. It almost sounded like those types of customers just wanted the hand-holding 100% of the way. And even if you trained them on it, they were like, no, can you just come in and do this for me? And it almost seemed like more of a hand-holding relationship for the Webflow side of the house. Fair-ish statement, or what are your thoughts?
Fairish. I would say it depends how you've set things up. If you've used components a lot, if you train clients in the right way and you use components for most of the site, it's actually very easy for them to assemble pages from what you've already done. But yeah, I think that's fairish.
I give you the edge there. Let's go plugins and integrations. I'm going to give WordPress the advantage on...
We don't even need to talk about it.
We don't even need to talk about it. This is where obviously I feel really strongly about tons of plugins, and I assume Webflow probably calls them integrations, right? Or do they call them plugins? I'm just
I
looking
guess
on their
apps. So
or
we now
apps.
have Webflow apps. So I guess that's so similar to like Shopify that has apps. It's now kind of, and that's actually a relatively new thing that's come out.
And is there a paid marketplace for that as well? Is everything free? What are your thoughts on how limited Webflow might be on the integrations or app side?
Yeah, I mean, it will be. It has to be more limited than WordPress because of the nature of WordPress, that you have access to everything to do with WordPress, whereas you don't with Webflow. But the good thing about it is that it's going to fill some of the gaps that we do have in Webflow to some extent. But yeah, I mean, obviously, it's impossible to compete with that one. I would say.
Let's talk development. I'm not a developer. I had a question up actually from Anton. Anton, I don't know how to say your first name. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, I can't see it on my screen. Why don't you try to make one landing page? Maybe we have a second. We can try to make a landing page. I'm not a designer developer. This is where Sam would just crush me. So there's that. But let's just quickly talk development. WordPress, open source. You can crack it open, customize it, do whatever you want with the code. Want to bring in your own code set? I don't even know what that means. You can bring it in. You want to write in Python. You can probably tie it up to WordPress. I don't know if you can do that with Webflow. PHP, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. Largely, that's what WordPress is. Developing, customizing WordPress is infinite. You can extend it. Webflow, they must have guardrails. Like you can't go in and change the code or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're working within the realms of what it allows you to do. So you obviously you can have custom code in the site, but you're still working within the bounds of Webflow to some degree. There's a few things you can do with Webflow, which is maybe a bit unique to it in the sense that Webflow has always allowed you to export your code away, which is pretty much unlike anything that you could have in WordPress. I mean, you probably wouldn't use a page builder like Elementor, export the code away and use it somewhere else. That would probably be a mess. You can do that with Webflow. I've done that for some clients that wanted that. You have something called DevLink with Webflow now as well, where you can basically export your site away as React components, and theoretically you could hook that up to a headless CMS like Strapi or Prismic or something like that. So in terms of moving away from Webflow, you're sort of you've got a few different options there, but again, it comes down a little bit to the nature of what WordPress is. But yeah, you are to a degree to a degree limited.
I'm going to give the advantage of development to WordPress and a little bit on the Webflow side, because I do see the inherent value of not having to touch that stuff. Obviously this makes the challenge a challenge, but it is what it is. E-commerce. I think you stay away from e-commerce. I heard you say this in one of your videos, maybe even that clip that I just played. You generally tend to push to maybe Shopify or something else. You not a fan of e-commerce on Webflow, or your thoughts there?
I mean, if I would say, well, things are changing a little bit. There are, because we now have Webflow apps. There's things you can do now where you can even tie Webflow and Shopify together. Actually, you can have a Webflow front end and a Shopify back end. So there are some limitations with Webflow e-commerce, and that's one of the reasons why I don't use it. It's also because I just don't like making e-commerce sites. But yeah, I think if you were if the primary function of the website was like a store with thousands upon thousands of items, I wouldn't necessarily choose Webflow. Mainly down to sort of things like inventory management and kind of payment gateways. You're a little bit limited on the kind of things that you can choose from for that. Certain countries have certain payment processes they have to use legally, like Ideal, I think, is one of them. You can't do that kind of thing with Webflow, so that kind of limits it to some extent. The kind of e-commerce site you'd use Webflow for would be, maybe as a secondary thing to the site. If it wasn't the primary use case of the site, I think it would still be fine to use. But no, for any sort of massive, large e-commerce store, I probably wouldn't use Webflow for that. Probably something more like Shopify. I probably wouldn't use WooCommerce either, really. But yeah, I guess that's just a personal thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna kind of agree with you, and I'm gonna put the e-commerce right up against the line. Here's where I lose all of my WordPress friends, because yeah, I mean, hey, obviously I love WooCommerce, but it's also one of those things where I too steered away from, and now again, this was years ago, so I'm sure it's a little bit better, but I hear some of the same struggles with a lot of my colleagues and friends in the space, that WooCommerce still is pretty challenging to develop, costly once you start adding in all the plugins and features. Shopify does a better job. You are giving up that open source that a lot of folks love about WordPress. If I ever got back into the agency game, I would probably focus on e-commerce, and just because I feel like that's where maybe more of the money is at, but don't really particularly love the WooCommerce solution either. I think it's like that 8,000-pound gorilla in the room, and just waiting for it to get a little bit more ideal for freelancers and agency owners and customers, to be fair. So put it right up against the line. Let's give advantage to WordPress side of it, but it is a different plugin and probably not the best. All right, here's the one you've been waiting for, Sam. Do you have enough time to go over? Do you have enough time to go over this hour? I know I've kept.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, fine by me. I need someone on our side, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else notice I tried cutting Sam out right before we started giving him the advantage?
Nice try.
I watched your video on components, and it's components. And is there another terminology in there too, or is it just components?
It is components.
Just components, yeah. Right. I saw what looks like what is coming to WordPress in the future, which was supposed to be in 6.5. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Pattern overrides, where you would create a pattern in WordPress, and you could define the fields, or the blocks technically, in the pattern, and have those as overrideable elements, so that a customer could come in, use your pre-designed pattern, and only change, let's say, the call to action in the block. And maybe we'll demo this quickly later. And I think that is what Webflow has been doing maybe for a little while, or they've just launched this components thing. I'll let you take it away. Explain components and why you like it so much.
Yeah, it's pretty much as you described, to be honest with you. So Webflow's had it, well, it used to be called symbols, which is basically where you would want to retain something so it's the same throughout the site. So like a navigation or a footer, for example, generally that the content of those are always the same. But fairly recently, in the last year or so, we had component properties, which does what you're describing, which basically means you can kind of you can create your own component system, but then override the content and even now styling as well, even via the CMS as well. You can control that now. So it's a great way of keeping your site sort of maintainable, and kind of very, very quickly sort of changing minor things. And clients, this is how I would approach Webflow with clients too, is that I would make everything components pretty much. And then even if they use the designer view, I feel a lot better about them using it to actually make minor changes, because you can actually kind of, you can almost stop them using the main designer view in Webflow and give them a more focused experience to change content, and also to make minor styling changes that don't require them to go over the UI, which would be maybe too complex for them to use. So yeah, pretty much everything I do now is all component based.
And I'm going to try to quickly just show this off, because I started to play with it. I was literally had your video up and this Webflow screen up the other day before, as I was getting ready for this conversation. And this is what would be considered. Now, I'll tell you what I do like. You can tell I am an absolute Webflow novice here. Let me just open this up a little bit. This is way better. Like the block list in WordPress is so frustrating. Super frustrating. This is nice, quick, easy to navigate all the different sections or blocks, whatever Webflow calls them. And then I created this section, which in WordPress would probably be referred to as a pattern. And in Webflow, I would go to properties, and these are the elements that you could assign a customer to edit, right? Inside of this section.
That's right. So you can create a component property for the heading, for the paragraph, for the link, for the background image. And you can even tie styling into it as well. We'd probably need a longer video to go into all that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can basically give them a lot of control. And it's also just good for you, the developer, as well. You can very quickly create. So what I do is I have a component system already pre-made that contains lots of common layouts, like 2-column sections, 3-column sections. So a lot of people say when you use Webflow, you have to start from scratch. You're doing it wrong if that's what you're doing. So you should be making things ahead of time. And components are another very useful thing for that. But yes, you can basically override what's already there and reuse it on various different pages.
Now, let's say you go and you create all of these sections for your customers. And just stop me if I start using wrong terminology. So let's say you go and you make all of these sections for your customers pre-designed. You do you discover, you wireframe, customer says, yes, I like this design. And then you say, okay, I'm going to make, I don't know, a dozen sections for you: call to action, newsletter, sign up, product, about page, team grid, services section. How does a client add that to a page? Like, do they see all the sections you've pre-designed and they can plop them in on a page if they want to?
Yeah, that's right. So if you went to a new page and then opened up your component panel, you can literally just drag and drop whatever you've called it onto the new page each time that you do that. Layouts are something different, actually. That's kind of a component library, which again is quite useful. But yeah, so it would be your symbols tab that you would need to do that.
Watch me fail on live.
Sorry,
live
my screen's
stream.
a bit far away.
Yeah. So if I don't want to add an element. I just want to add a page. Where do I go to start a blank page?
Yeah. So just below the plus icon, you should have the pages tab. And if you just go and create a new page at the top right there.
Got it. Upgrade your site plan. See, look at this. Already getting limited. Already getting, look at this about page. All right, we'll go to the about page. Now,
well, you can do it on this page too. So if you opened up your components panel, you would then see a list of the different ones that you've got.
Got it. Matt's hero. So there's the hero I made, and that just drops it in right there.
That's right. And you can use those with blogs as well, and all that kind of any kind of CMS collection. You can use those
I mean,
too.
we could do that too in WordPress, Sam. Let's slow down here. Test page. So again, this is what I'm just very obviously both of us are accustomed to our different tools of choice here. But in WordPress, you can pull up the different patterns, the different banners. This is the default 2024 theme. I like the visual representation, even though you don't use really many of these. But to pull in this call to action is click it, drop it in, and now I can come in and style it. But yes, locking this down for the customers is not a thing yet. Pattern override. Yeah, there's Brian. God, thank God I have Brian in the show. Brian, pattern override didn't make it into 6.5, right? So it's coming. That kind of feature to lock in these sections. But I find patterns, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm comfortable with the tool. I do find it quick and easy to build landing pages with blocks and patterns. Designing a whole site with it could be challenging for some, is challenging for some, I know. But I really appreciate the patterns and the blocks and how fast I can build a site. Webflow has it too. What does the crowd say? What does the crowd say? Patterns versus
I wonder what they'll say.
Welcome to the lion's den, Sam. I'll be nice to you. I'll be nice.
Next week you come on mine and we'll do this again.
All right, let me share this again. I don't know. It's hard for me. I feel like here's what my gut wants to say. Put it right here. Maybe fair to put it right in the middle. Let me turn to the crowd. I would
edge it over.
Zach, Zach says, we often make a blank page for clients with all the components displayed on the page. All right, cool. Zach's a Webflow guy. I did not know that. Let's see. Zach also says Reloom library is Webflow component king. I've heard of Reloom, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, basically it's a pre-built component library, a little bit like what you showed on the WordPress version, where you've got kind of lots of different layouts pre-made.
All right, Sam, I'll give you the point. I give you the point.
I think we deserve this one.
But as soon as you sign off, I'm going to slide it right back over here. All right, I'll give you the point. Security. I know we're really capped out at time here. Security. I mean, I just give you the case. I mean, I'm not in love with WordPress security. I mean, I think WordPress is secure. You haven't seen anything major come from WordPress core in I don't know how long. Plugins and themes. Yeah, that's a huge ecosystem. The advantage is huge ecosystem. Hosting companies are fairly pretty good with locking that stuff down rather quick. I've also never heard of a Webflow security issue. I don't know if you have, Sam, in your travels.
Yeah, so not at all. It's just this is one of the benefits of a closed platform, is that there's less things that can go wrong. So the vulnerabilities that we had in Quickly and Bricks, unfortunately, and I think even Elementor too had the same kind of thing. That does not happen, or at least not that we know of. That doesn't really happen in Webflow. So I've never heard of anyone getting hacked. It's just not a thing in Webflow, which is, again, it is one of the benefits.
And accessibility as the last card.
We didn't win that one.
I gotta give it right down. I gotta give it right down the middle because. All right, I'll give you the advantage.
Yeah, we need that one, I think.
Let me line it up with this. Let me line it up with the support advantage because it is a one-stop shop. Yeah, you're fair. I did gloss over that one too quickly. One platform, not a third-party ecosystem. You are obviously giving up a lot of the benefits of WordPress, but it is all encompassing, and you would hope that in a major security issue, that the Webflow team would be right on it and addressing any concerns. So I give you the, I'll even give you a little bit more.
That should be firmly over there, I think.
All right, fine. All right, I'll put it all the way over here for you. So there it is.
Gotta give me something.
Give me something. I gave you design and security. Okay. Accessibility. Again, as somebody who is not designing anymore, sadly it wasn't as prominent back. There weren't as many tools. There wasn't as many advocates when I was running my agency for accessibility, and largely, the projects that we were getting in, there wasn't a lot of attention to it from the client side either. Again, those are the projects that I ran back in my time. I know Equalize Digital, Amber Hines, the accessibility checker plugin. There's a lot of advocates for it on the WordPress side of things. There's a lot of tools for it on the WordPress side of the house. I'm definitely not familiar with it on the Webflow side. Your thoughts, accessibility, Webflow, does it come into your projects? Is Webflow by default accessible?
I think it can be. It's sort of down to the individual, really. And I don't confess to be an expert on all of it. But yeah, things like ARIA labels and if you're using REM units and kind of not using too much motion. It's never been hacked, Brian.
Brian's definitely
the day it does. I'll come back on and you can say I told you so. But yeah, it certainly can be, but it very much is down to the individual. Obviously, if you've got tons of motion, that kind of thing, is kind of a no-no. So it can be, but it very much depends on the individual. The benefit now in Webflow, we've got something called a custom element, which basically means you can use any HTML tag that you want to. So Webflow's default button option, for example, was just a link. So now with the custom element, you can have any HTML tag that you want. You can have pretty much any CSS property you want. We've got a new panel for that. So it can be, if you know what you're doing. But obviously, it is down to the individual to some degree, which I will confess I'm not an expert on that anyway.
Yeah. Brian also brings up a good point. Brian's a prolific WordPress developer. Also worth discussing the accessibility of the editor itself, not just the accessibility of the final site you create, 100%. Brian, even I'm not up to speed on. I know accessibility in Gutenberg was definitely a thing when it first launched, because I remember I remember Rachel Cherry and Morton talking about this when Gutenberg first launched. Admittedly, don't know how far they've come. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen anyone bring up any critical points, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, nor are they, thinking about improving it. And actually, Peter just brought up the same thing. I wonder how accessible Webflow is. Tariq has a good question. Security, talking about the security card. Would that mean WordPress is not secure compared to Webflow? Look, this whole challenge is difficult to really, pinpoint exactly where the advantages lie. I think a lot of it sort of, you have to ask yourself, one, do I want to be an open source first? Like, if that's important to you and you want complete control, then you go to WordPress. And if you want something that's more turnkey, with the value add of having everything in one shop and not having an expansive ecosystem, then a tool like Webflow makes total sense. And then once you decide which path you're going down, a lot of these discussion points, you have to debate it out, or you have to break it out. Security in this case, I think I give the advantage to Webflow because it's a one-stop shop. If there's something wrong, you're just looking at Webflow. I guess maybe apps you've connected up to it, or could be an infection point. But you can't upload code, right, to this, Sam? It's not like you could deploy code to Webflow. That could be a security issue. No.
So it's because you don't have access to, direct access to databases, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, I've never ever heard of any Webflow site being hacked. The worst thing you can do is have a terrible password and don't have two-factor authentication switched on, maybe, but that's kind of your own silly fault if you do that. But
yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I think inherently by being closed, you're less likely to have issues like we have done recently with some WordPress page builders.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's just, if Webflow gets hacked, then there's an issue across X amount of sites that Webflow has, or customers that Webflow has. One of the challenges with WordPress is that it's so fragmented and hosting's everywhere that I guess in a widespread hack, there are different players involved that could protect their customers maybe faster or better than another hosting provider, right? Even if it's core WordPress, maybe updates could be changed, rolled back. There's a lot of different scenarios at play. I think the target of WordPress is much larger. This is when people would always say like, oh, Microsoft is, years ago, terrible because it's such an it can get hacked so quick. But it's also a massive CMS. I'm joking.
It's taking it out of you, all this.
Lost my voice, Sam. Here we go. So accessibility, I will give it to the WordPress side because of... I just think that there's a lot more focus on it, and there's a lot more focus on it from the community standpoint. So we'll give the card to accessibility on WordPress. Fair enough, Sam. I gave you 2 cards out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, 14 cards. You got 2. 2.5. I gave you 2.5 for the components and block patterns. Let me just share this screen one more time. Any final words, Sam? Anything? Did you feel like this was a fair debate? Do you think there's something missing? Should we have covered another topic on WordPress versus Webflow?
Yeah, I want my own cards.
What cards would you have added?
Yeah, I mean, I think... Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think it's fairly fair. I mean, it's impossible for Webflow to fully compete on every aspect. Again, the nature of WordPress being basically free. But yeah, I mean, things like, in terms of like, things were quickly recently, we always talk about, it being open source in WordPress. But if your page builder goes out of business very suddenly, like they did, for example, everyone that used that tool has to rebuild all their websites. I don't think that would ever happen with Webflow. I'm not saying that Webflow won't go out of business, but they wouldn't do it in such a way where they have a corporate structure, a chain of command. So I think from a safety aspect, clients actually feel pretty safe with Webflow, given their sort of track history. So I think that aspect, Webflow might potentially win. Obviously, if you're using core WordPress, it's a different story. But it's I don't think every niche builder in WordPress means you're completely safe. Usually because they're created by very small teams, I would say, or more often than not, it's one person or a couple of people or very small teams. So I think from a safety aspect, as long as you're using Webflow for the right kinds of website, I think it's a pretty good choice. But ultimately, yeah, if you want ultimate control, you'd have to use something custom or WordPress potentially as well.
Sam, this has been a fantastic conversation. I threw your YouTube channel and your website into the chat. Obviously, an hour and a half isn't long enough to really hash out this debate, but it was fun. It was great learning a little bit more about Webflow. And yeah, I'm already seeing it. Like I said at the top of the show, there's a lot of prominent WordPress agencies out there now bringing Webflow into the mix and, being advocates for Webflow. I can't see how, they both can exist because WordPress has been doing this for years. There's a lot of folks who are huge WordPress advocates, but when their friend's friend asks them to build a website, sometimes they just go, oh no, just go to Wix, just go to Squarespace, because it's going to be WordPress, the learning curve and finding a web host. It's a lot of folks look at it as it is more of an advanced tool. Like there's people out there just because you can get in for free or cheap, people still look at it as like, no, you got to learn it, you have to understand it. And that is largely the challenge with WordPress. So yeah, don't be fooled. Not just because people support WordPress doesn't mean they're also not recommending something else, especially the competitors to WordPress. So fantastic stuff, Sam. Thanks for hanging out today, buddy.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Everybody, don't forget, go check out Sam's YouTube channel, subscribe there, drop that in the chat, and check out his soon-to-come Webflow course. I'm sure there's a newsletter you can sign up for so you can get notified for that. Does Webflow have newsletter sign up widgets? What do they call them?
Yeah. Yeah, they do. Yeah. They have that at least.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching today.